I was running around the internet the other day when I stumbled across an article that discussed the recent measles outbreak in California. Measles hasn't been around since 2002 because of the life-saving MMR vaccine, which prevents the disease. Now, the reason for this outbreak is directly attributed to parents not vaccinating their kids with the MMR vaccine. Why aren't they vaccinating their kids? Well, for a multiple amount of reasons. For one, there are celebrity endorsements which claim that getting a vaccination will give a child autism.
The most news in the morning, period. Weekdays 6 Eastern.
Evan was diagnosed with autism in 2005. Without a doubt in my mind, I believe vaccinations triggered Evan's autism. We do believe because we were the witness with our child, our firsthand witness after we came home from the doctor's office and saw this regression of a child that was perfect and then slowly fading away.
The American Academy of Pediatrics and others continue to say that there is no link between vaccines and autism. They go on to say that the risk of not vaccinating could be even worse. What do you say?
Now, as you can see, Jenny McCarthy, the celebrity featured in the video, as well as other parents, have made these claims without any scientific evidence to support it. Instead, most scientific evidence claims the opposite, that not vaccinating your children is dangerous. And so they made this decision from what I think is their emotions. It's their emotional connection to their children. Their decision not to vaccinate both affects the child's health as well as every person that child comes in contact with. And so this emotional-based decision-making leads me to my knowledge question. To what extent should emotion be considered in making ethical decisions? Ethics are the moral principles governing or influencing conduct. And it's important to note that ethics are different among cultures and individuals because of our different morals and upbringings. In the case of ethical decision-making, emotions create bias and cloud judgment. This is especially true for parents and their emotional connection to their children. They want what is best for them, and they really want to protect them. But because the parents so fiercely want to protect their child because they think they're doing the right thing, they do not think logically, and in the process hurt their child and other children. In this case, their emotions deceive them and lead them to the wrong decision. But if they used more reasoning, then they can make the more ethical decision. Reasoning with scientific evidence and research in multiple perspectives are the right way. Thus, it would seem that emotions should not be trusted when making ethical decisions. You should choose reason instead. Though on the other hand, emotion is an integral, powerful, and necessary component of our ethical decision-making. It allows us to empathize as well as feel guilt, which oftentimes helps prevent bad ethical decisions. For example, I had the opportunity to cheat on a test when the teacher left the room, but I chose not to because it made me feel so uncomfortable and guilty. And thus, in this case, my emotions led me to the right ethical decision. But if I did not trust my initial emotions and instead used reason, if I logically concluded that the school system was out to get me and fail me, and me, by cheating on my test, was able to cheat them at their own game. You see, that is not a good decision. Reasoning, just as much as emotion, can lead to bad ethical decisions. But it's important to note that cheating and not vaccinating a child are very different in severity. They affect different amounts of people and to a different extent. Cheating only affects me, the individual, whereas not vaccinating affects many and to a possibly dangerous extent. Thus, the way that a person reaches their decision must apply different ways of knowing and to different levels, and different levels of emotion and reason. This leads me to my knowledge issue. How does emotion influence reasoning? Since I determined that both ways of knowing are necessary in making ethical decisions, I want to see how emotions influence and sometimes deceive reasoning, which would affect the outcomes of the decision. One way of looking at this relationship is through the confirmation bias. The confirmation bias is a term in psychology which is the tendency to search for or interpret information in a way that confirms one's preconceptions, leading to statistical errors. We reach confirmation biases because of our preconceptions, which are nurtured by our emotions and how we feel. And then that confirmation bias leads to flawed reasoning. For those parents who decide not to vaccinate and want to protect their children, for those parents who decide not to, this is for those parents who decide not to vaccinate. They want to protect their children. Once they have an idea in mind that vaccinations may be dangerous, they will only seek information that feeds their emotion-based bias. And so they will always reach this conclusion that vaccinations are bad, and again, ignore scientific evidence that proves otherwise. The implications are that it prevents us from reaching truth, and because people don't look at it objectively. Reason is faulty because people avoid the truth and other perspectives to justify belief and eventual decisions. In the case of the confirmation bias, emotion affects reason negatively. But in another example, emotion affects reasoning positively. We discovered my dog had cancer, and we had to decide whether to put her down immediately or let her live, and she would live for a while longer, but it would be extremely painful and she would die eventually, painfully and slowly. My parents' emotional connection to our dog led us to the decision to put her down because we didn't want to see her go through any more pain. Thus, we reasoned that putting her down would be the best decision because although we would be extremely sad that she'd be gone, she could die peacefully, and we could live peacefully knowing that we made the right decision. In another example, I will discuss animal testing. Some people are against animal testing and want to eliminate it altogether. They strike and burn down labs that test on animals, despite the practice of testing on animals being beneficial to the medical community in finding cures for different things, different diseases. And so this is led by their emotional sympathy for the defenseless creatures. Animal rights activists are able to justify their beliefs and actions through their emotions, their emotional connections. This can also tie back to the confirmation bias, because the activists will hang out and talk with like-minded individuals, but their emotions prevent them from seeing the bigger picture. The cures that come from animal testing ultimately justify the means, and if animal testing were to cease because of people's flawed and biased reasoning, then the humans would suffer. But in this case, the emotional sympathy, which could lead to rallies against the inhumane, harmful treatment of animals, which can and should be fought against. So emotions in that case can be beneficial in the same situation, but they're different because you must weigh the outcomes. It doesn't completely get rid of animal testing, but it still is ethical. So in conclusion, emotion plays a necessary and important role in making ethical decisions. Emotions are part of what makes us human and are the determinants in how we feel about the decisions we make and how we reach those decisions. But in order to make the decision, emotion must be paired with logical reasoning. But sometimes our emotions can blind us. This is especially clear in my real-life situation about the parents who do not vaccinate their children. Parents are blinded by their emotional connection to their children and refuse to see the truth which is based in scientific evidence. But more importantly, ethical decision-making is relative to the severity of the outcome of the decision, Because the decision affects many, and possibly to a fatal extent, the emotions should be trusted less, and the situation must be looked at objectively in order to make the ethical decision that would benefit the child and the greater good, and different ways of knowing, such as logical reasoning that is based in proven evidence, should be used. The end.